The bitter wind cut through the Wyoming valley like a knife, carrying the promise of another harsh winter. Ethan Rollins stood on the porch of his sprawling ranch house, watching the sun sink behind the jagged mountains that bordered his 5,000 acres. At only 32, he was already the wealthiest rancher in the territory, owner of the largest cattle operation between Cheyenne and the Montana border. Yet as the golden light faded, all he felt was the hollow ache of a man surrounded by everything except peace. Inside, the house hummed with the small sounds of evening, pots clanging, footsteps on the wooden floors, the faint voices of servants preparing supper. By frontier standards, it was a grand home, 2 full stories of timber, real glass windows, and rugs imported from Denver. It had everything money could buy. Everything except the laughter that used to fill it. "Mr. Rollins, sir?" The timid voice came from the doorway. Ethan turned. It was Clara Bennett, the new maid who'd arrived 3 weeks ago from Ohio. She was maybe 20, with wheat-colored hair pulled into a neat bun and soft gray eyes that never quite met his. Her plain brown calico dress was simple but spotless, and she held a shawl around her narrow shoulders against the chill. "Yes, Miss Bennett?" "Supper's ready, sir. Mrs. Henderson said to tell you it's beef stew tonight, with fresh bread." He nodded, but didn't move. The girl shifted from one foot to the other, clutching her shawl tighter. He'd noticed that about her, how nervous she always seemed, like a sparrow ready to take flight. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, had told him Clara's story, a merchant's daughter from Cincinnati whose family lost everything in bad investments. Her father drank himself to death, her mother died soon after, and Clara had come west looking for work, any work. "Will you take it in the dining room, sir?" she asked quietly. "The study," he replied. "I have ledgers to review." "Yes, sir." She bobbed a curtsy and disappeared. Ethan remained outside a while longer, watching as twilight deepened. 3 years. 3 long years since Sarah and little James had been buried on the hill by the cottonwoods. He'd built this empire since then, thinking maybe if he worked hard enough the pain would fade. It hadn't. Inside his study, the fire burned low. The room smelled of old books and tobacco. On the wall hung a single portrait, Sarah in her wedding dress, holding their infant son. It was the only trace of warmth left in the house. When Clara entered with a tray, she moved quietly, setting down the bowl of stew and bread with careful hands. "Thank you," Ethan said, taking his seat. "Mrs. Henderson wanted to know if you'll need anything else tonight. She's not feeling well and means to retire early. Tell her to rest. I'll manage fine." Clara hesitated, glancing at the portrait on the wall. "Beautiful family, sir," she said softly. Then she flushed, realizing she'd spoken out of turn. "They were," he said simply. She curtsied and hurried out. Ethan ate without tasting a thing. When he finally rose from his desk hours later, the fire had burned low and the wind howled through the eaves. But as he climbed the stairs toward his room, a faint voice drifted down the hall. He stopped, frowning. It came from the kitchen. Moving silently, he followed the sound until he reached the doorway. There, in the dim lamplight, was Clara. She was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, lips moving as she talked softly to herself. "Tomorrow I'll dust the parlor extra well," she murmured. "Mr. Rollins doesn't use it much, but it should still be proper. And I'll polish the silver again, even though Mrs. Henderson says once a week is enough. It's such fine silver, probably worth more than Papa's whole store was." Her voice cracked, and Ethan saw her shoulders shake. She gripped the basin, whispering, "No crying, Clara Marie. You're lucky to have this place. A roof, food, wages. Some girls don't get even that." Then softer, almost like a prayer, "Mr. Rollins is kind. Just so sad all the time, like he's looking at ghosts." Ethan stepped back into the shadows, his heart twisting. He hadn't spoken of his grief to anyone, yet this quiet girl had seen straight through him. He went to bed, but her words wouldn't leave his mind. The next night, he found himself watching her more closely during supper. She moved gracefully, though her hands trembled slightly when pouring his coffee. Her eyes flicked up only once, meeting his for half a second before darting away again. After the meal, he surprised her by speaking. "Miss Bennet, how are you finding your position here?" She blinked, startled. "Very well, sir. Mrs. Henderson's teaching me everything I need to know." "And your room? Comfortable enough?" "Oh, yes, sir. It's lovely and warm." For the first time, she smiled, just a small one, but real. "Good," he said. "If you need anything, speak to Mrs. Henderson." "Yes, sir. Thank you." That night, Ethan lingered in his study after dinner, pretending to work but really listening. Around midnight, the floor creaked softly outside. The door opened. He slouched in his chair, eyes closed, breathing slow and even, pretending to be asleep. Through his lashes, he saw Clara tiptoe in, a tray in her hands. She froze when she saw him sleeping, then carefully gathered the empty dishes. But before leaving, she paused by his chair. Ethan felt the faint brush of movement, the blanket from the back of the chair being pulled gently over him. "Poor man," she whispered. "Working yourself to exhaustion won't bring them back." Her voice trembled. "I know. I've tried it myself." She tended the fire quietly, coaxing new warmth from the coals, then stood for a long moment looking at the portrait of Sarah and James. "You had a beautiful family, Mr. Rollins," she said softly. "I hope you find peace someday." The door closed behind her, and Ethan sat motionless. For the first time in years, something inside him stirred. The shy, nervous maid, who hardly spoke by day, had shown more genuine care in a few quiet moments than anyone had since his wife's death. He looked at the blanket she had laid across him, still warm from her hands, and for the first time in 3 years, Ethan Rollins didn't feel entirely alone. The pattern began without planning. Every night, after supper, Ethan would retire to his study, pretending to work late over his ledgers. And every night, just before midnight, Clara would slip quietly through the door. Believing him asleep, he would listen as she moved softly around the room, collecting dishes, straightening the desk, and always pulling that blanket over him with the same gentle care. Each time she thought he was asleep, she spoke in whispers that were never meant to be heard. Little thoughts, half prayers, things she carried alone. "Your hands are cracked from the cold, sir," she murmured one night. "I made this salve from beeswax and herbs. My mama taught me. I'll leave it here." "It helps." She placed the small tin on the side table, then added softly, "You're not as old as you try to seem. It's the grief that's aged you." "I understand that too." Ethan sat motionless, pretending to dream, but inside he was wide awake, his heart twisting at her kindness. He had thought his pain invisible, yet somehow this quiet girl saw straight through him. By the 5th night, he was no longer sure whether he stayed awake to test her or because her nightly visits had become the only thing that made him feel alive. Her voice filled the silence that had ruled his house for 3 years. Her words were small, but they mended something in him that work and wealth never could. Then came the 7th night. He waited as usual, sitting in his chair with his boots off, head back, pretending to sleep. But tonight, Clara was slower coming in. Her footsteps dragged, uneven. Through half-open eyes, he saw her set down the tray with trembling hands. She swayed, catching herself on the edge of the desk. Even in the low firelight, he could see her face was flushed and pale all at once. Sweat glistened on her forehead. "Just a little fever," she whispered to herself. "Nothing to fuss about. Can't lose this job. Not after all this time." She tried to move toward him, that same blanket in her hands, but her knees buckled. Ethan leapt up, catching her before she fell. "Miss Bennet!" Her eyes widened in shock. You were awake?" Quote. "I know," he said quickly. "You're burning up." "I'm fine, sir," she tried to protest. "Please don't wake Mrs. Henderson. She'll think me weak." But her voice broke, and she shivered violently. Ethan didn't hesitate. He carried her to the chair by the fire and shouted, "Mrs. Henderson!" The old housekeeper appeared within moments, wrapped in a robe. One look at Clara and she clucked her tongue. Fever, I knew it. Girl's worked herself half to death. Get Dr. Morrison, Ethan ordered. At this hour? For a maid's fever? Now, Ethan said firmly. She's under my protection. Clara whispered weakly. You mustn't trouble. But he silenced her with a look. Within an hour, Dr. Morrison arrived. The gruff old man examined Clara and nodded. Just exhaustion and a touch of fever. She needs rest and good food. Keep her in bed for a few days. She'll mend fine. When the doctor left, the house fell silent again. Ethan stood by the fire, staring at the small tin of salve Clara had left him, the little token of her care. For the first time in years, his heart ached not from grief, but from worry for someone still living. For 3 days, Clara stayed abed under Mrs. Henderson's watchful eye. She fretted about her chores, about being a burden, about losing her position. Girl doesn't know what kindness is, Mrs. Henderson muttered. Been kicked around too long. On the 4th day, Ethan knocked on Clara's door. Her soft "come in" reached him through the wood. She was sitting up in bed, sewing a tear in her worn dress. At the sight of him, she flushed and dropped the fabric. Mr. Rollins, I'm not dressed proper. You're ill in your own room, he said gently. Proper doesn't matter. He sat down in the chair beside her bed. How do you feel? Much better, sir. I'll be back to work tomorrow, I promise. You'll rest until Dr. Morrison says otherwise. He paused. Miss Bennet, I owe you an apology. Her brow furrowed. For what, sir? For deceiving you, pretending to sleep while you spoke and tended the fire. It was wrong of me. Clara's cheeks turned pink. She looked down at her hands. I'm the one who should apologize, sir. Talking to you like that, taking liberties, you must think me foolish. He shook his head. No, Clara. I think you're one of the kindest souls I've met. Those things you did, the blanket, the fire, the salve, those were not foolish. They were human. They were everything I'd forgotten the world could be. Her eyes filled with tears. I know about loss, Mr. Rollins. I know how it feels to be alive and yet invisible. Like you're walking behind glass while everyone else lives their lives. No one should feel that alone. The room fell quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. You won't lose your job, Ethan said finally. In fact, he hesitated, when you're well, I'd like you to take on the role of head housemaid. Higher wages, lighter duties. You've more than earned it. But I've only been here 3 weeks. And in those 3 weeks, you've shown more heart than some people show in a lifetime. He rose to go. Rest now. Mrs. Henderson will tell you more when you're well. Mr. Rollins, she said softly as he reached the door, those nights, were you really awake every time? He turned back, smiling faintly. Every one of them. Her hand flew to her mouth. Then you heard everything? Everything, he said. Oh, how mortifying. Not mortifying, he replied gently, illuminating. You showed me what kindness sounds like. He left her then, but his heart was lighter than it had been in years. 2 weeks later, when the February blizzard rolled down from the mountains, Ethan found himself thinking of her again. He had ridden out to the north pasture to check on the cows, ignoring his foreman's warnings about the storm. By the time he turned for home, the world had vanished in a blur of white. The wind screamed, snow stung his face like needles, and his horse stumbled through chest-deep drifts. Hours later, half frozen, he reached the ranch house and collapsed at the kitchen door. It flew open, and there she was, Clara, still pale from her own illness, but strong and steady as she caught him. Mr. Rollins, she cried. Oh, thank God, quote. She dragged him inside, shouting for Mrs. Henderson. In moments, the kitchen came alive with movement. Blankets, hot water, steam rising from the stove. Clara knelt beside him, her hands chafing his frozen fingers, her breath trembling. This will hurt, she murmured, but it means the blood's coming back. Hold on. For an hour, she worked beside Mrs. Henderson, reviving him with broth and steady hands. When the fire's warmth finally reached his bones, he felt her arms around him, holding him steady through the shaking. That night, Clara stayed by his side until he slept, whispering softly, You're safe now. You're home. And for the first time in years, Ethan dreamed of warmth instead of loss. Sunlight poured through Ethan Rollins' bedroom window when he woke. The world outside sparkled under fresh snow, and for the first time in weeks, the cold didn't seem cruel. Clara was there by the hearth, adding a log to the fire, her movements quiet and steady. He cleared his throat. "Clara." She spun, startled, then smiled. A soft, shy smile that lit up her face. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like a man who owes his life to his housemaid," he said. His voice came out rough, but warm. "I just did what anyone would have done." "Not everyone," he replied. "You saved me." She blushed, brushing her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Henderson and I took turns through the night. You were so cold, sir, I didn't think we'd get your color back." He tried to sit up, but winced. "And you stayed?" "Yes," she said softly. "I couldn't leave you." Ethan studied her face, the faint circles under her eyes, the way she twisted her fingers when nervous. She'd risked her own health to keep him alive. Gratitude filled his chest, but so did something deeper, something he hadn't dared feel in years. "Clara," he said quietly, "thank you, truly." Her eyes lifted to his, gray and shining. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you came home." Days passed, and Ethan recovered. Clara was always near, bringing food, tending the fire, reading softly from old books she found on his shelves. Her laughter, gentle and rare, began to echo in the halls that had known only silence. Then, one March afternoon, trouble found its way to the ranch. Ethan returned from a ride to hear shouting in the kitchen. He hurried inside to find one of the new ranch hands, Jake Thornton, leaning too close to Clara. She stood, pressed against the wall, her hands trembling as she clutched a mixing bowl like a shield. "Please, Mr. Thornton," she said. "Let me pass." "Aw, don't be like that," the man drawled, just being friendly. "That's enough." Ethan's voice cut through the room like a whip. Thornton straightened, his face darkening. "Boss, we were just talking." "Look to me like she asked you to stop," Ethan said, stepping closer. "You're finished here. Get your wages from Charlie and be gone by morning." "You're firing me? For this little misunderstanding? For harassing a woman under my roof?" Thornton's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." "Not as much as you will if you're still here by sunrise," Ethan said evenly. The man spat on the floor and stormed out. Clara sagged against the wall, tears glinting in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have kept quiet." "Don't you dare blame yourself," Ethan said. "You did nothing wrong." "But he'll spread rumors," she said bitterly. "Men like that always do." "Let him talk. No one will believe him." "You can't promise that," she said, shaking her head. "It's better if I leave, sir, before I cause trouble." "You're not leaving," Ethan said firmly. "This is your home now." "My home?" she said softly, as if testing the word. "I'm a servant, Mr. Rollins. I don't have a home." He looked at her, his heart heavy. "Then you'll have one here as long as I draw breath." Before she could answer, a crash sounded down the hall. They rushed to her room to find the window shattered. On her bed lay a dead rat, and scrawled across the wall in mud were 2 words, "Uppity Maid." Clara's face went pale. "He did this," she whispered. "Pack your things," Ethan said quietly. "You're moving to the blue room upstairs." "I can't," she protested. "That's a family room. You're under my protection. That makes you family." She tried to argue, but his tone left no room for it. That night, she moved upstairs. Mrs. Henderson fussed over her like a mother hen, and Ethan set guards on the property until Thornton was gone for good. But the damage to Clara's heart couldn't be mended so easily. She felt she'd brought shame and danger to his home, and guilt haunted her eyes. 2 nights later, Ethan found her crying quietly in the barn. "I'll leave tomorrow," she said when he approached. "You've done too much for me already." He sat beside her on the hay, the smell of horses and pine smoke thick in the air. "Clara, do you know what Charlie told me after my wife died?" She shook her head. "He said pain makes us foolish, but running from the people who care about us is the biggest foolishness of all." "You're not running again. Not this time." She looked at him through tears. "I'm scared." "So am I," he admitted. "But I'd rather face it with you than go back to living half dead without you." Her breath hitched. "You can't mean that." "I do," he said simply. "You're the light in this house. You're the reason it feels like home again." Quote. Slowly she reached out, her fingers trembling. "Ethan!" He took her hand in his. "Clara, I don't care what the world thinks. I care about you." The words hung in the air, like a vow. A week later, a letter arrived from Denver. The powerful Ashcroft family wanted to discuss business. When Ethan refused their offer, their daughter Evelyn came to the ranch herself. Rich, beautiful, and dangerous in all the ways vanity and power could make a woman dangerous. She insulted Clara, called her a servant who didn't know her place, and offered Ethan wealth, influence, even marriage. But Ethan only said no. Evelyn's smile turned to ice. "Then I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man hides a maid in his house." Her threats spread faster than wildfire. Rumors poisoned the town, but Ethan stood firm, and Clara stood beside him, refusing to hide. When Evelyn returned to humiliate them in front of guests, Clara finally lost her silence. "You can lie about me all you want," she said, voice trembling but strong. "But you will not stand in this house and insult the man I love." Quote. Evelyn's eyes went wide. "Love?" "Yes," Clara said proudly. "I love Ethan Rollins. And if that makes me a scandal, then so be it." Evelyn fled, furious and defeated. That same evening, as the sun dipped low behind the snowy peaks, Ethan turned to Clara. "Let them talk," he said. "Let them gossip. I'm done living for ghosts." He took her hands, eyes steady. "Clara Marie Bennett, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. They married at sunset on the front porch of the ranch house. The sky blazed gold and crimson. Cowboys cheered. Mrs. Henderson wept. And as Ethan kissed his bride, warmth returned to the house that grief had long claimed. Months later, the lies had faded. The ranch prospered again. One morning, Clara took Ethan's hand and placed it on her belly, smiling through tears. "There's going to be a baby," she said softly. He froze, then laughed, a sound that carried across the valley. That night, as they sat by the fire, Clara dozed off in her chair, a blanket slipping from her shoulders. Ethan pretended to sleep beside her, then quietly reached out and covered her with it. And when she whispered in her dreams, "Sleep well, my love," he finally understood what peace felt like. In a house that had once been cold and silent, warmth had returned. For good.